Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are really immersing ourselves in a tradition that's, well, it's not just celebrated across Mexico, but it's becoming known and, frankly, loved all over the world. We're talking about the annual celebration of Dia de Muertos.
hmm And right at the heart of this really poignant but also celebratory holiday, there's this one culinary element. Feels like the perfect intersection of history, art, and just layers of symbolic meaning.
Exactly. We are, of course, talking about pan de muerto, the bread of the dead. And it looks, deceptively simple sometimes. It's a type of pan dulce, a sweet bread.
But it's arguably the most symbolic centerpiece you'll find on the ofrenda, that's the home altar, during the November 1st and 2nd celebration. It's essential.
So our mission today, for you listening, is a truly comprehensive journey. We're going way beyond just the basics here. We want to unpack the competing historical origins,
Right.
From indigenous offerings all the way to those European soul breads. We are going to dissect the rich, beautiful symbolism that's packed into literally every rounded dome and every strip of dough.
And then this is the really hands-on part. We're going to dive deep into the kitchen. We're aiming for an intensely instructional but also analytical tutorial. We'll cover 5 distinct regional masterpieces, breaking down ingredients, techniques, everything.
Ingredient by ingredient, step by step.
Exactly. Now, what really stands out immediately about the classic pan de muertos, the one most people picture, is its distinct symbolic anatomy. You see that large, rounded bun shape that's often interpreted as representing a grave or maybe even the skull itself. And then you have the decorations, these ropes of dough. They're often called phalanx pieces, and they symbolize the bones of the deceased.
So this bread, it isn't just food, it's telling a story, right?
Absolutely. It nourishes, but it narrates too.
Okay, let's unpack this anatomy fully then, because like you said, every single element seems intentional. It feels like it's built layer by layer to communicate some really profound ideas about life, death, remembrance.
Precisely. You mentioned the rounded or domed top representing the grave. But those bones, those ropey decorations, they are just incredibly rich when you start digging into the symbolism.
Tell us more about those, the defuntos.
Yeah, sometimes they're called defuntos or defuntos, which directly means the deceased ones. So right there, the connection is explicit, and they're arranged in a very specific, very intentional pattern. When bakers roll them out, they often use their fingertips spread wide, almost like a claw.
Oh, interesting technique.
Yeah, and they roll it across the strip of dough to create these 4 small bulges along the length. Now, those bulges are meant to distinctly resemble bone joints, or maybe some interpretations say they're a stylized representation of tears, or even the 4 cardinal directions pointing to the universe.
Wow, okay, so even the way they're shaped has multiple layers.
But the deeper layer, the really crucial symbolic component, is the arrangement itself on the bread.
How they're placed on the bun.
Exactly. These bone strips are almost always arranged in a circle, or crisscrossing over the dome, often forming a cross shape right on top. And that circular arrangement, that crossing pattern, represents the continuous, unbroken cycle of life and death.
Ah, okay, so it's not just about bones, it's about this cycle.
Precisely. It's this acknowledgement of the endless cosmic flow, the continuity of existence, even when you're facing loss. And that idea is so profoundly important to the entire Dia de Muertos celebration. It's central.
And then there's that final little piece, right? The small sphere, that little ball of dough, usually pressed right in the center where the bones cross over.
That small ball. That's the skull, the calavera.
Yeah.
No ambiguity there. And sometimes, depending on the region, you might find another little shape baked onto the surface, like a small teardrop.
A teardrop.
Yeah. And that's believed to represent the tears of a specific goddess, Chimala, shedding tears for the living. It adds this really poignant note of like cosmic grief or empathy to the offering.
That's beautiful. Okay, before we get tangled in the historical weeds, let's just establish the baseline. What's the classic flavor and texture profile we're talking about? What should you expect if you bite into one?
Right. So at its core, it's what bakers call an enriched sweet dough. That means it uses a significant amount of fat, usually butter, sometimes lard, along with eggs. This gives it a really rich, tender quality. Think something similar to a good brioche or maybe a Jewish challah.
Okay, brioche and challah, good benchmarks. For listeners who maybe haven't had those, how would you describe it further? Is it light and airy? Dense?
It's sort of in between. It's definitely not a super light, air-filled commercial bun. But it's also not a dense, heavy loaf either. It has a yielding quality. Often bakers use high-protein flour, like bread flour, specifically to help the dough structure handle all that fat and sugar without becoming tough. It needs strength.
You mentioned concha earlier, too, as maybe a reference point. Just to clarify for everyone, a concha is that classic Mexican sweet roll with the distinctive shell-like pattern made of a crumbly sugar paste on top, right?
That's the one. Pan de Muerto texturally falls somewhere between the richness you get in chala and maybe the slight density of a concha base. But crucially, it lacks that signature hard, sugary topping of the concha. Its finish is different.
And the flavor. What cuts through that richness?
Orange, almost always orange. It's the signature flavor profile. You'll typically get it either from potent floral orange flower water agua de azahar or from fresh orange zest rubbed into the sugar, or both. And many traditional versions, especially in more rural areas, also include the gentle warmth of crushed anise seeds.
Orange and anise. Classic combination.
Very classic, gives it that distinctive aroma. Hashtag 1.2 consumption and the ofrenda.
So once this beautiful, highly symbolic bread is baked, what's its main job, ritually speaking, especially think about the ofrenda?
Its primary role, its destination really, is the domestic altar, the ofrenda. Or sometimes, families take it directly to the gravesite itself on Dia de Muertos. It's considered an absolutely essential offering. You'll see it there alongside water, maybe the departed's favorite drinks, tequila, perhaps, and often things like cigarettes or toys if it's for a child.
So the bread represents both sustenance
Yep.
and what?
A link.
Yeah, exactly. Both food for the journey and a material link to the memory of the deceased. That makes the memory tangible.
And this leads us to that really fascinating belief about spiritual absorption. It sounds almost metaphysical.
It really is. There's this deeply ingrained belief passed down through generations that the spirits, when they return to Earth after their long journey, well, they don't actually consume the physical substance of the bread.
They don't eat it.
Not in the way we do. Instead, the belief is that they absorb its essence, its spiritual energy, its aroma maybe, along with the water provided, which is crucial for quenching their thirst after the journey.
Wow. So they take the spiritual nourishment first? Exactly. And then, once the spirits have had their fill, once they've taken their due, the living then consume the physical bread. It ensures the offering serves both worlds, the spiritual and the material. It creates this beautiful completion of the cycle, a sharing across dimensions.
A literal sharing of the offering. That's incredible. And while the peak time for eating it and putting it on the altar is November 1st and 2nd, the bread kind of functions as a cultural timepiece too, doesn't it? Like, its appearance signals something.
It absolutely does. Our sources note that in some regions, bakeries start selling it and people start eating pan de muerto for months leading up to the official celebration.
Months. Wow.
Yeah, it serves as this culinary marker, announcing that the season of remembrance is approaching. Much like, pumpkin spice signals fall in the U.S., or certain cookies mark the winter holidays elsewhere. Its presence shifts the atmosphere.
Okay, now this is where the history gets, well, messy. And maybe a bit politically charged, too. Because the origins of Pan de Muerto, much like the whole celebration of Dia de Muertos itself, seem to be this magnificent, tangled knot of Spanish and indigenous cultural mixing.
There's definitely tension in choosing which origin story to emphasize, depending on who you ask and what narrative they want to promote.
So let's try to establish the facts first. What do we know for sure about the ingredients?
Okay, the undeniable part is the core ingredients. Things like wheat flour, cane sugar, cow's milk and butter, eggs, and the entire culture of European-style oven baking itself. These were all introduced by the Spanish after the conquest.
Right, not native to Mesoamerica.
Exactly. And this is why many classic Mexican sweetbreads, pan dulce, have clear Spanish or broader European counterparts. The building blocks came across the Atlantic.
And for pan de muerto specifically, the most direct European precursor seems to be something called pan de animas, soul bread.
Correct. Pan de animas. This was a very deep-rooted tradition, a votive offering prepared specifically for All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, November 1st and 2nd, across southern Europe. We're talking places like Castile and Aragon in Spain, but also Portugal, even Sicily.
And what did that tradition involve?
Typically, parishioners would visit the cemetery, they'd clean the graves, and they'd leave offerings primarily bread, but also wine and flowers. It was a respected religious offering, sometimes even called pan bendecido, meaning blessed bread.
Yeah.
It was part of the church calendar.
So the Spanish colonists brought this pan de animas tradition with them to New Spain. And during the Viceroyalty, the period of Spanish rule, it was gradually assimilated by indigenous peoples, often layered over their own much more ancient pre-Hispanic beliefs about death, ancestors, and remembrance.
Exactly. It was a process of syncretism.
Mm,
And you can still see echoes of this assimilation today in states like Puebla and Tlaxcala,
yeah.
which have a really strong Spanish colonial architectural and cultural influence. People still sometimes refer to their Day of the Dead bread specifically as pan de animas.
Yeah.
The old name persists.
Okay, so that seems like a fairly clear-cut, ingredient-based lineage tracing back to Europe. But this narrative often competes, right? Especially in popular culture, tourist guides, maybe even official
Oh,
promotions.
yeah.
It competes with a much more dramatic, frankly gruesome folk history,
Yeah.
one that relates directly back to pre-Hispanic human sacrifice.
Ah, yes, the notorious cannibalism myth. This is one that gets repeated so frequently. You see it in tourist literature,
Yeah.
sometimes even, unfortunately, in museum descriptions, despite being factually, well, inaccurate.
Can you relate the myth for us? What's the story?
The myth usually claims that before the Spanish arrived, the Aztecs or other groups practiced human sacrifice where a maiden's heart would be offered to the gods. Her still-beating heart was then supposedly placed in a pot filled with amaranth grain.
Amaranth. Okay.
And participants in the ritual would bite into the heart amaranth mixture as a symbolic act of gratitude or maybe communion with the gods. The story then posits that the Spanish conquistadors, finding this practice utterly repulsive, demanded that the indigenous people replace the actual human heart with a symbolic heart made of bread specifically, a sweet wheat-based bun, often colored red to mimic blood.
So, replacing the physical sacrifice with the symbolic one made from European ingredients.
Precisely. It's a really powerful story, isn't it? It blends horror with culinary substitution, even if it's likely a fabrication, possibly one designed by the Spanish themselves to justify replacing indigenous rituals, or maybe a later folk explanation.
But as you pointed out, even though it's likely untrue historically, the story did successfully sort of codify the bread's symbolic meaning that we see today.
It absolutely did. The myth provides this neat, albeit dramatic, rationale for the shapes. The circular form symbolizes the endless cycle of life and death. The little ball on top is the skull, and the cross strips are the bones of the deceased. It creates a narrative that perfectly validates the ritual significance of eating this bread.
There's that quote you mentioned from José Luis Quirel Monteagudo.
Yes, it captures the spirit perfectly. He wrote, "Eating the dead is a true pleasure for the Mexican. It is considered the anthropophagy of bread and sugar. The phenomenon is assimilated with respect and irony. Death is challenged, they make fun of it by eating it." It highlights that blend of reverence and playful defiance.
But the tension remains because often Mexican public institutions, maybe governmental bodies, sometimes seem to cite completely different ancestors for the bread, focusing purely on pre-Hispanic roots, and sometimes entirely omitting the Spanish Christian connection.
Correct. And this is where the cultural politics of identity really come into play. It's about emphasizing indigenous resilience and continuity. For instance, institutions like the National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, or the government of Mexico, have at times promoted the papaloaxali as the remote origin.
So what now?
Papaloaxali.
Oh.
It was apparently a type of tortilla shaped like a butterfly, and it was offered to the spirits of women who died in childbirth, who were revered as goddesses known as the Chuapipiltin.
A butterfly tortilla. Okay.
There's also sometimes mention of something called the huitla tamale, which was described as a type of votive tamale used in offerings.
Oh.
By emphasizing these indigenous forms, it constructs a narrative of cultural continuity that predates the trauma of colonization and the imposition of Spanish ways.
So after weighing the European pan de animas tradition, the dramatic sacrifice myth, and these potential indigenous precursors, what's the academic consensus? Where does the evidence really point for the true parentage of pan de muerto?
Well, the verdict tends to lean heavily on the actual physical makeup of the bread. This is sort of the aha moment in this whole debate. As anthropologist Stanley Brandes quite pointedly notes, the composition of the bread itself, the wheat, the cane sugar, the cow's milk and butter, the eggs, the orange aroma, all of these key ingredients arrive via the Columbian exchange. They weren't here before.
Right, the building blocks again.
Exactly. Brandes makes the telling observation. There is no tortilla de muertos, but rather pan de muertos. Pan, meaning bread made from wheat. So the final product, the thing we actually eat, is fundamentally colonial or even Roman via Spain in its structure and ingredients.
Even if the spiritual purpose and the shapes adapted.
Precisely. Even if the spiritual purpose honoring the dead in the aesthetic forms, like the bone shapes, the skull, the placement on the ofrenda, were perfectly adapted to fit profound, ancient, indigenous traditions and beliefs about death. It's really a stunning example of cultural syncretism, where European ingredients and baking techniques were adopted and reshaped to serve deeply rooted Mesoamerican spiritual needs. Ingredient availability drove the form, but the meaning was localized. Hashtag 1.4 regional diversity and modern relevance.
Okay, so we've established this complex history. Now, beyond the 5 specific instructional recipes we're going to dive into in a bit, it's worth emphasizing just how much regional diversity there is in this bread across Mexico. It's definitely not a single monolithic recipe, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. It's a whole spectrum of flavor, texture, shape, decoration. You find incredible localization. It really reflects the diversity of Mexico itself. For example, down in San Andres Mixtic, a place famous for its Day of the Dead celebrations near Mexico City, they make despinadas,
Despinadas, meaning
unkempt ones or disheveled ones, and they live up to the name. They're typically round breads, entirely covered in colorful sprinkles and sesame seeds, giving them this wild, shaggy, almost chaotic appearance. Very different from the neat bones of the classic style.
wow, okay. And what about other regions like the state of Mexico or Michoacan? We're going to cover Michoacan figures later, but are there others?
Yeah, in the state of Mexico surrounding Mexico City, they make something called huertes, which interestingly is often a blend of sweet dough and plain dough swirled together, incorporating cinnamon. They also have other specific regional items like little cornmeal cakes called gorditas de maíz and specific shapes called huesos, bones, or apareos de huevo, egg harnesses maybe. Michoacan, besides the figures we'll discuss, is also known for a very shiny, almost plastically smooth bread called pan de
Pandohu, rubber bread.
yeah, rubber bread. It sounds weird, but it refers to the texture of the glaze. It uses a high egg content, possibly specific brushing techniques, to achieve this unique, super glossy, almost impermeable looking finish. Very distinctive.
And we see variations in Puebla too, right? Often coated in that bright pink sugar.
Yes. Puebla often features breads covered in vibrant pink sugar, sometimes shaped differently too, maybe simpler rounds. And remember, Puebla is one of those places where you might still hear it called pan de animas, connecting back to that stronger colonial link we talked about earlier.
It's just incredible diversity. What's also fascinating, especially for maybe listeners outside Mexico or the U.S. Southwest, is how this intensely localized, deeply ritualistic tradition has managed to rise in global awareness, particularly over the last few decades.
It really has had a remarkable trajectory.
That journey kind of started in the U.S., didn't it, with the Chicano movement?
It absolutely did. Starting really in the 1970s and gaining momentum through the 80s, Chicano cultural activists in the U.S. embraced Dia de los Muertos traditions, including the bread and the creation of public altars, ofrendas, as central elements of cultural affirmation and identity.
And they often use these altars for more than just remembrance, right?
Oh, definitely. They often became powerful forms of public protest and social commentary. Altars would be dedicated to victims of social injustice, farm worker struggles, or police brutality. Pan de Muerto, placed on these public altars, became this tangible, consumable symbol of remembrance, resilience, and resistance.
And then in more recent years, it's just exploded into global popular culture. It feels like it's become a kind of cultural ambassador for Mexico.
It really has. It's been cemented in the global consciousness through massive cultural touchstones. Pixar's movie Coco was huge, obviously. And there are other examples, like the celebrated young adult novel Cemetery Boys, which features the traditions prominently.
So the bread itself now travels across borders, across languages.
And often, it seems, it communicates culture almost sensorially, sometimes even without people needing the deep historical background, the sight, the smell, the taste. It conveys something powerful. I love that example from the outline, a 2019 Japanese exhibition on Mexican folk art that featured a full pan de muerto baking demonstration, complete with samples for visitors.
Wow, in Japan.
Yeah, it just proves that this single sweetbread, with all its history and symbolism baked in, can be this incredibly effective tool for global cultural outreach and understanding. It's quite amazing.
Okay, let's make that transition now. We're shifting gears from centuries of history, symbolism, and cultural spread right into the science and the artistry of the baking process itself.
Time to get our hands doughy, metaphorically speaking.
Exactly. This next big section is dedicated to analyzing how these regional traditions dictate not only the specific ingredients, but also the critical techniques, the little nuances in method that ensure each of the 5 regional masterpieces we're covering has its own completely distinct identity.
Yeah, we're going to be dissecting things like dough science, hydration, enrichment levels, fermentation, but also the geometry of shaping and the aesthetics of the final finish. So maybe get your notepad ready or just listen closely because this is where all that theory we talked about becomes practice in the kitchen.
It's bake.
All right, first up, the Mexico City version. This is really the iconic image that most people probably recognize when they think of pan de muerto. It's often called hojaldre.
Now, that name hojaldra is interesting because hojaldra in Spanish usually means puff pastry, right? Something with flaky layers like laminated dough. But this isn't laminated dough, is it?
That's a great point and a common point of confusion. No, it's definitely not laminated like a croissant or true puff pastry. The term hojaldra here is thought to refer more to its supposed richness, and the way it pulls apart, it has a shreddable, rich texture, almost like internal layers or flakes, due to the high fat and egg content compared to a standard leaner bread.
Ah, okay. So it implies richness and a sort of flakiness in how it tears, even without literal layers of butter being folded in.
Exactly. And this version is the quintessential orange-forward bread. That's its defining aromatic characteristic.
Okay, so let's break down the critical ingredients that create that flavor profile and structure. What are we looking at?
We're typically starting with about 500 grams of all-purpose flour, though bread flour works well too for structure. Then a good amount of sugar, around 150 grams, about 80 grams of unsalted butter, softened, 3 large eggs, about 125 milliliters of whole milk, and crucially for that flavor, 1 tablespoon of potent orange zest, really finely grated, and 1 tablespoon of that highly floral orange blossom water, the agua de azahar. And of course yeast, about 11 grams of active dry yeast.
Okay. Now, the first critical technique you often encounter with enriched doughs is yeast activation, getting the yeast woken up properly. This recipe mentions being precise about the milk temperature 43 degrees Celsius or 110 Fahrenheit. Why is that specific temperature so important? Getting it wrong can really trip up bakers, right?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. Yeast, as you know, are living organisms, and that 43 Celsius or 110 Fahrenheit is really the sweet spot for maximizing their activity quickly without harming them. If you warm the milk too little, say below 100 F, they'll wake up very slowly and your rise will be sluggish. The dough might feel dense.
And too hot.
Too hot is instant death. If you hit around 55 Celsius, 130 Fahrenheit or higher, you kill the yeast on contact. Game over before you've even started. So precision with the thermometer is really key here. You combine the yeast, a little bit of the sugar to feed it in that perfectly warmed milk. Let it sit for about 10 minutes. You must see that frothy, foamy head develop, and the mixture should visibly increase in volume, ideally doubling. That's your proof that the yeast is alive and kicking.
Got it. Active and happy yeast. So once the yeast is proven, the mixing process begins. And you mentioned the butter incorporating fat into dough is a unique technical challenge for these enriched breads, isn't it? It's not like just mixing a lean dough.
No, it's the defining step for achieving that rich, tender, almost brioche-like texture. The method is crucial. Typically in a stand mixer, you'd combine the dry ingredients, first flour, sugar, salt. Then add the activated yeast mixture, the eggs, the orange zest, and the orange blossom water. Mix on low speed until a shaggy dough just starts to form, and not before this point you begin incorporating the softened butter.
Softened, not melted.
Softened, yes. Room temperature, pliable, but still holding its shape. And the key is adding it gradually, usually 1 tablespoon or a small chunk at a time, while the mixer is running on low or medium-low speed. You wait until each piece is mostly incorporated before adding the next. This whole process might take 3 or 4 minutes.
And what happens if you get impatient and just dump all the butter in at once? Why is gradual addition so important?
It spells disaster for the gluten development. If you add all that fat too quickly right at the beginning, the fat coats the flour particles too early. It essentially waterproofs them, preventing the proteins in the flour, gluten and gliadin, from properly hydrating and bonding together to form the gluten network.
Ah, okay.
So the dough will likely remain greasy, it'll feel slack, it might separate, and it will never achieve the necessary smooth, strong, elastic structure it needs to trap the gas from the yeast and rise properly. That slow, gradual addition allows the gluten to start developing first, and then the fat emulsifies into that structure properly, creating tenderness without completely inhibiting the structure.
That makes perfect sense. So after all the butter is patiently incorporated, then comes the serious kneading and the baker's benchmark, the window pane test. Can you explain why this test is so important for knowing if you've kneaded enough, especially for a rich dough like this?
Right, so after the butter is in, you'll typically increase the mixer speed to medium and knead for a good 6 to 8 minutes, maybe even longer depending on your flour and mixer. The dough should transform from looking a bit ragged to smooth, shiny, and elastic. The window pane test is the universal professional check for perfectly developed gluten in enriched doughs.
How do you do it?
You take a small piece of dough, maybe the size of a golf ball. Gently, slowly stretch it between your fingers. If you can stretch it thin enough that you can see light passing through it, forming a translucent membrane, like a window pane, without it tearing easily, then you know your gluten network is strong and elastic.
And why does that matter for the final bread?
That strong elastic network is what traps the carbon dioxide gas produced by the yeast during fermentation and proofing. If the gluten isn't developed enough, the gas escapes, and you get a dense, heavy, tight-crumbed bun. If it's perfectly developed, passes the window pane test, it can stretch to hold those gas bubbles, resulting in a light, airy, well-risen hochaldra with that lovely shreddable texture. It's the difference between a brick and a beautiful bread.
Okay, window pane test passed.
Right.
Now for the first rise, the bulk fermentation, it needs warmth and consistency, right?
Yes, enriched doughs like this often prefer a slightly warmer environment to rise well because the sugar and fat can slightly slow down the yeast activity compared to a lean dough. The ideal temperature range is usually around 24 to 27 degrees Celsius or 75 to 80 Fahrenheit.
And how can home bakers achieve that? Ovens can be drafty?
The classic home baker hack is perfect here. Turn your oven light on. Don't turn the oven on, adjust the light, and place the bowl of dough, covered of course, inside the oven. The heat from the light bulb usually creates just enough gentle, consistent warmth. Or if you have a proofing setting on your oven, use that. You want a draft-free, slightly warmed environment. The dough will need about 1.5 to 2 hours for this first rise or until it's fully doubled in size.
Doubled in size.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, after that rise, we gently deflate it, and then comes the iconic shaping, the geometry of the loaf, the bones, the skull.
Right, so after gently deflating the dough to release the large gas bubbles, you need to divide it. The standard practice is to reserve about a quarter, 25% of the dough for making the decorations, the bones, and the skull.
Okay.
The remaining 3/4 is divided into however many loaves you're making, maybe 3 or 4 from this amount of dough. For each loaf, you use the cupping technique.
Cupping technique.
Yeah, you place the piece of dough on an unfloured surface, the slight stickiness helps, and cup your hand over it loosely. Then you move your hand in a circular motion, letting the dough roll underneath. This creates surface tension, pulling the outer layer of dough tight, resulting in a smooth, tight ball. You then flatten this ball slightly into a disc, maybe about 15 centimeters or 6 inches across.
Okay. Smooth, tight, slightly flattened disc, and then the bones. That technique sounded quite specific.
It is, and it takes a little practice. You take pieces of that reserved decoration dough and roll them into ropes, maybe about 15 centimeters long again. Now, here's the key part. You splay your fingertips wide apart, like a claw, keeping them straight. Then you press down and roll this claw across the rope of dough. The spaces between your fingers create the indentations, while the parts under your fingers remain raised, forming those 4 small, distinct bulges that are meant to resemble bone joints.
Ah, I see. The gaps between the fingers make the thin parts. The fingers make the bumps.
Precisely. You'll typically make 2 of these bone strips per loaf. You lay them across the top of the flattened disc, usually in a cross shape. Then you take a small ball of the remaining decoration dough, that's the skull, and press it firmly into the center, right where the bones intersect, to make sure it sticks during the second rise and baking.
Okay, shaping complete. They need a second rise, right? Proofing.
Yes, absolutely. You place the shaped loaves on your baking sheet lined with parchment paper, cover them loosely with plastic wrap or a damp cloth, and let them proof in a warm place for another hour or so until they look puffy and have increased in size noticeably, maybe not quite doubled, but significantly risen.
And then baking. Temperature, any special considerations?
Bake in a preheated oven at 175 degrees Celsius, which is 350 Fahrenheit. Now, because this is an enriched dough with eggs and sugar, it can brown quite quickly. So a key tip is to tent the loaves loosely with aluminum foil after about 20 minutes of baking. This prevents the tops and the decorations from getting too dark or burning before the inside is fully cooked.
Good tip. How do you know when they're perfectly done?
The most reliable way is internal temperature. Use an instant read thermometer inserted into the center of the loaf, avoiding the bottom. You're looking for a temperature between 88 and 93 degrees Celsius, or 190 to 200 Fahrenheit. They should also sound hollow when tapped on the bottom.
Okay, baked perfectly. Now for that iconic sugar finish, you mentioned it relies completely on precise timing. What's the secret?
The secret is heat and butter. While the bread is still warm, not piping hot straight from the oven, Maybe let it cool for 5–10 minutes, but definitely still significantly warm to the touch way. You immediately brush it generously with melted butter, all over the top and side.
So the warmth is key.
Absolutely. That warm bread and the melted butter create the perfect sticky surface. The butter acts as the adhesive. Then, immediately after brushing with butter, you sprinkle the bread liberally with granulated sugar. We're talking a good amount, maybe 100 grams total for the batch. You can even gently roll the tops in a plate of sugar. If you wait until the bread cools completely, the butter will solidify and the sugar just won't stick properly. You won't get that nice, even crust.
Timing is everything for that finish. The finish aesthetic, then, is that beautiful contrast. The golden brown dome, the white sparkle of the sugar, often presented, as you see in photos, with vibrant orange and purple papal picado, cut paper banners, and fresh marigold petals, the cempasúchil.
Exactly. And traditionally served with Mexican hot chocolate or café de olla. It's the whole sensory package.
Okay, from the bustling capital, let's move south, geographically and stylistically, to Oaxaca. We're talking about pan de yema, the yolk bread.
And that name, pan de yema, tells you almost everything you need to know right up front. This is a bread where richness is paramount. It's intensely eggy, aromatic with crushed anise seeds, and incredibly tender, specifically because of its high yolk content.
So how does that high egg content actually compare to the Mexico City recipe we just discussed? And what specific effect does using mostly yolks have on the final structure and taste?
It's a significant difference. Where the Mexico City one might use, say, 3 whole eggs, this Oaxacan recipe calls for 4 whole eggs plus 3 separated egg yolks, just for the same cue, roughly 500 grams of flour. So that's a total of 7 yolks contributing fat and emulsifiers.
7 yolks. Wow.
Yeah, that density of yolk does a few things. First, it contributes to a much richer, deeper yellow color in the crumb.
Yeah.
Second, the extra fat and lecithin from the yolks result in exceptional tenderness and moisture. The final texture will likely be softer, maybe slightly denser or cakier, and less springy than the hojaldra. It makes it absolutely perfect for soaking up liquids, like Oaxacan hot chocolate.
Okay, softer, richer, yellower. Got it. Now, the technique for yeast activation here is also different, isn't it? The outline mentioned it's not just a standard warm milk proof.
No, this often uses a more old-school, high-activity method to really get the yeast going strong, perhaps to compensate for the richness of the dough. You create a thick paste, sometimes called a sponge, or maybe closer to a poolish or pâté fermenté in baking terms. It's made from a portion of the flour, some of the sugar, all of the yeast, and just enough lukewarm water to make a paste.
And you let this paste ferment first.
Exactly. This mixture is allowed to ferment on its own for maybe 30 to 40 minutes until it's bubbly and visibly active, before you add it to the rest of the dough ingredients, the remaining flour, sugar, salt, eggs, melted butter, anise. Allowing the yeast to get a head start and maximize its activity in this separate stage helps guarantee maximum lift in the final dough, which is important when you have a lot of heavy ingredients like egg yolks and butter potentially weighing it down.
Interesting. Melted butter here, not softened.
Often melted, yes.
Yeah.
Or very, very soft. It incorporates slightly differently but contributes to that very tender crumb. Around 150 grams, so significantly more butter than the Mexico City version too. Richness upon richness.
And the handling of the anise seeds is also noted as meticulous. What's the key there?
The key is to lightly crush the anise seeds, not grind them into a powder. You'd typically use a mortar and pestle. The goal is just to crack them open enough to release their fragrant essential oils. If you powder them completely, 2 things can happen. 1, you risk releasing some bitterness along with the aroma, and 2, finely powdered anise can sometimes give the dough a slightly gray or muddy appearance. Cracking them maintains their integrity and gives little bursts of flavor.
Makes sense. Now, given all this richness from the yolks and butter, the shaping seems to remain much simpler than the classic hojaldra with its bones. Is that reflecting a traditional Oaxacan style?
It is, generally. While you can sometimes find pan de yema shaped into small human figures, especially for altars dedicated to children, the most traditional and common form is simple, smooth rounds, usually smaller, individual-sized buns, maybe 90–100 grams each. The focus in Oaxaca is often less on the elaborate bone decoration and more on the luxurious quality of the crumb itself. The richness is the statement.
Okay, simple rounds, but they have a signature topping, sesame seeds. What's the technique for getting them on, and is there symbolism behind using sesame?
Yes, the sesame seeds are key. After the shaped rounds have had their second rise, proofed, you brush them generously with a rich egg wash. Often this uses that extra egg yolk you saved from separating the eggs, beaten with a splash of water. This gives a beautiful golden sheen. And then immediately, while that glaze is still wet, you sprinkle the sesame seeds generously all over the top.
Why immediately?
The wet egg wash acts as the glue. If you wait, the seeds won't stick. The symbolism often associated with the countless tiny sesame seeds is that they represent the tears shed for the departed. It creates this lovely visual and symbolic contrast, the sadness implied by the tears, alongside the warmth and nutty flavor of the toasted seeds when baked. They also provide a really delicate, brittle crunch against that super tender interior.
That's a beautiful juxtaposition. Aesthetically, this bread, you often see it displayed differently too, right? More rustic.
Yes, very much so. Less of the bright papal picado, perhaps, and more often displayed on rustic terracotta platters or nestled in woven baskets lined with traditional Oaxacan textiles, which often feature deep reds and blacks in their patterns.
And served, of course, with Oaxacan hot chocolate. You mentioned the molinillo. What exactly is that?
Ah, the molinillo. It's a specific type of wooden whisk or stirrer, native to Mexico, often beautifully carved with intricate designs and loose rings. It's designed to be held between the palms of your hands and rotated rapidly back and forth. This action froths the hot chocolate, which in Oaxaca is often water-based and intensely flavored with chocolate and sometimes almonds or nuts, creating a thick, luxurious foam on top. Using a molinillo is considered an essential part of the ritual of preparing and serving traditional Mexican hot chocolate, ensuring the beverage is as rich and texturally perfect as the pan de yema it's served alongside.
The whole experience sounds incredibly rich and traditional.
It truly is, deeply rooted in Oaxacan culinary identity.
Okay, moving geographically again, this time to Michoacan. If the Oaxacan bread was all about richness and texture within a simple shape, Michoacan's pan de animas soul bread seems to be almost entirely about sculpture.
Exactly. This is where the bread becomes explicit art. The focus here is overwhelmingly on creating anthropomorphic figures, little bread people, meant to symbolize the peacefully resting soul of the departed. The shaping is by far the most complex we'll discuss.
So the dough itself must be formulated differently to support that complex shaping, right? It can't be too soft or rich.
Precisely. This dough is different again. It's typically flavored more simply, maybe with just vanilla extract or perhaps optional anise seeds, but it generally uses significantly less sugar than the Mexico City hojaldra. This is important because too much sugar can cause the dough to spread too much during proofing and baking, losing the defined figure shape.
Less sugar for structural integrity.
Right. It allows the rich, slightly yeasty flavor of the bread itself to dominate. And the finishing touch is also deliberately subtle. There's no sugar coating or thick glaze. It relies solely on a touch of butter for color and finish.
So the kneading requirement must be different too then. If the dough needs to hold these fine details, arms, legs, head through 2 rises and the heat of the oven.
It is critical. You absolutely must knead this dough for a good amount of time. Probably a minimum of 8 to 10 minutes by machine, maybe 12, 15 by hand. The goal is to develop a very supple, very elastic dough that's still maybe slightly tacky, but definitely not sticky or slack.
Why is that elasticity so crucial here?
Because the dough needs to have the strength and memory to retain the fine details in the figure. If the dough is too slack or under-kneaded, the little arms you carefully fold across the chest will just relax and spread out during the second rise, or in the oven's heat. The legs might merge back together. You'll lose that distinct human or mummy-like form. Strong gluten development is key for definition.
Okay, strong dough. Now, take us through creating one of these figures. The outline mentions a mummy-like pose. It sounds intricate.
It requires meticulous handling and probably some practice to get right. You typically start by portioning the dough into maybe 90-gram pieces. Roll one portion into a cylinder, maybe about 18 centimeters or 7 inches long.
Okay, a cylinder.
Then you form the head first. Press your index finger down firmly across the cylinder, about 5 centimeters, 2 inches from one end. This creates the indentation for the neck. Then gently roll just that 5-centimeter end back and forth under your palm until it rounds into a distinct head shape, leaving the neck indentation clear.
Head and neck formed. What about the body, arms, and legs?
You gently flatten the remaining longer portion, the body leaving the head rounded. Flatten it maybe 15 centimeters long and 8 centimeters wide. Then, using a sharp knife or bench scraper, cut a V shape up from the bottom center, maybe a third of the way up the body length. This separates the bottom part into 2 distinct legs.
Okay, legs separated. Now the arms, this sounds like the trickiest part.
It can be. You need to make a small horizontal slit, maybe only 1.3 centimeters or half an inch long, on each side of the upper body, sort of where the shoulders would be. Then, very gently, you tease out the dough above the slit to form little arms, pulling them slightly away from the body. The final crucial step is to carefully fold these arms across the torso so they meet or even slightly overlap in the center. You need to press them down gently but firmly so they adhere, and hold that symbolic prayer-like or crossed mummy-like position during proofing and baking.
Wow, that's detailed work.
It really is bread sculpture.
Now, the finishing technique is also quite different, almost counterintuitive compared to the sugar-coated standards of Mexico City or even the sesame seeds of Oaxaca. Why does Michoacan deviate? Why no sugar or glaze?
The lack of a heavy sugar coating or glaze serves two main purposes here. First, and most obviously, it maintains the visual integrity of the sculpted figure. A thick glaze or sugar crust would completely obscure the fine details of the crossed arms, the separated legs, the head shape. You wouldn't see the person.
Right, it would just be a lump.
Exactly. Second, the finish relies on a different timing and purpose for the butter. Instead of brushing with butter after baking for adhesion like the hojaldra, you brush the shaped figures lightly with melted butter before they go for their second rise, their final proof.
Before proofing, how does that function differently?
Brushing with butter before proofing does a couple of things. It adds a little richness and flavor, yes, but primarily it helps to create a very thin, supple skin on the dough surface. This can help the figure retain its shape slightly better during the rise, and more importantly, it assists in achieving a deep, even, naturally golden brown color during baking without needing egg wash and without creating a thick, shiny crust that might crack or obscure the details. It also allows the bread to bake well at a slightly higher temperature.
Higher temperature.
Yes, these figures are often baked at a higher heat, maybe 200 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees air, but for a shorter time, maybe only 15 to 22 minutes, because they are smaller and have more surface area than a round loaf. The pre-rise butter brush helps them brown nicely in that short, hot bake.
That's fascinating. So the finished aesthetic is just golden brown bread in human form.
Essentially, yes. Beautifully golden brown, letting the sculpted form speak for itself. Aesthetically, when placed on the ofrenda, these figures are typically arranged lying flat, often in rows, with their arms crossed, clearly symbolizing peaceful rest or death. They might be surrounded by paths made of cempasúchil petals, leading them to the altar, maybe with small candles placed at their head and feet.
And the accompaniments are often simpler, too.
Often, yes. Less focus on rich drinks, perhaps, and more often served alongside things like calabaza and tacha, which is a traditional candied pumpkin cooked with piloncillo sugar and cinnamon. It complements the simple, honest flavor of the bread.
All right, let's travel again, this time heading east to the tropical Yucatan Peninsula. Here we seem to return to the more classic pan de muerto shape, the round loaf with the bone strips and the central skull ball.
That's right. The structure is familiar, similar to the Mexico City classic in form.
But the aesthetic is completely different. It's defined by this incredibly vivid, striking, sweet red glaze.
Yes. If Michoacan was about subtle sculpture, Yucatan is about bold, unmissable color. The dough base itself might be quite similar to the classic, often flavored with aniseeds and orange zest using butter and eggs, but it's the finish that makes it uniquely Yucatecan.
So the key is in the glaze ingredients. Powdered sugar, fresh orange juice, maybe vanilla extract, but the crucial element is the red food coloring. Why red? Is there a specific symbolic function for this intense color in the Yucatecan context?
The interpretations vary, but the vibrant red color, often intensified using gel food coloring to achieve a really deep hue, sometimes said to evoke the color of aquillo paste, which is very common in Yucatecan cuisine, is generally thought to symbolize a few things. It can represent the vitality of life, contrasting with death. It might symbolize the bloodshed in sacrifices, though perhaps more in a historical sense, or simply the sweetness of the offering, the sweetness of life and memory. Whatever the specific reading, it results in a visually arresting bread that really demands attention on the ofrenda, standing out against the lush greens and blues of the region.
It sounds stunning. Now, applying a glaze like that, especially in a region known for its heat and humidity, like the Yucatan, must present some technical challenges.
Oh, absolutely. This is the primary technical hurdle for this style. The absolute non-negotiable rule is that the bread must be completely cool before you even think about glazing it.
Completely cool, not even slightly warm.
Not even a little bit warm. If there's any residual heat in the bread, the glaze, which is essentially a simple icing made from sifted powdered sugar, whisked with liquid, orange juice, maybe water or milk, And vanilla will just melt on contact. It'll become thin, runny, possibly soak into the bread unevenly, and you won't get that smooth, opaque, vibrant finish. You'll just have a sticky, pinkish mess.
And achieving completely cool in a hot, humid climate can take time.
It can take significant time and patience,
Hmm.
but the entire aesthetic relies on getting this step right. The visual payoff of that stunning red glaze makes the waiting worthwhile.
So, assuming the bread is finally cool, how do you mix the glaze itself? Getting the consistency right must be important too.
Yes, you need to sift the powdered sugar first to avoid lumps. Then you gradually whisk in the liquid, the orange juice or water, and the vanilla extract. You want to whisk it vigorously until it's perfectly smooth and reaches a consistency that's thick enough to coat the back of a spoon opaquely, but still fluid enough to spread easily and maybe drip a little down the sides naturally.
And the color.
Yeah, the red food coloring chart. Gel paste coloring works best for achieving really intense, vibrant colors without thinning the glaze too much drop by drop, whisking well after each addition until you reach that desired bright, festive, almost startling red.
Application technique. Should it be neat or rustic?
The application is generally meant to be generous. Use an offset spatula or the back of a spoon to spread it thickly over the top of the cooled bread, allowing it to drip naturally down the sides. Because it's a sugar glaze, it will start to set fairly quickly once exposed to air, so you need to work with reasonable speed.
Can you add anything else? Sprinkles?
Sometimes, while the glaze is still wet, bakers might sprinkle on additional coarse sugar crystals, maybe clear or white, to give it a bit of a shimmering texture against the smooth red. But often, the dramatic red glaze is left to be the star.
Aesthetically, how is this vibrant bread typically presented?
The vibrancy of the red glaze is often deliberately contrasted with brightly colored ceramic plates. Think turquoise blues, sunny yellows, coral pinks, colors common in Mexican pottery. Or sometimes, for a really tropical feel, it might be presented on large, glossy green banana leaves. The display often reinforces that connection to the lush, colorful environment of the Yucatan. You might also see it accompanied by offerings of fresh orange segments or small dishes of local honey, echoing the glaze ingredients and the sweetness of the region.
Okay, our final instructional recipe takes us away from the tropical coast and up into the highlands of central Mexico, specifically Guanajuato. This version seems to offer a more delicate, maybe even ethereal aesthetic compared to the Yucatan's boldness.
That's a great way to put it. Guanajuato's pan de muerto is often defined by its pure white glaze, sometimes accented with pink sugar, and a significant flavor difference: the inclusion of cinnamon inside the dough itself.
Ah, so the defining flavor profile change here is that ground Mexican cinnamon canela is actually integrated right into the dough mix, along with maybe the more standard orange zest or orange blossom water.
Exactly. Typically, the recipe might call for about 1.5 teaspoons of finely ground Mexican cinnamon to be whisked right into the dry ingredients, around 450 green flour, sugar, salt, before adding the wet ingredients: yeast, milk, eggs, 75-degree butter.
How does adding cinnamon directly to the dough affect things? Does it change the texture or impact the yeast's rise at all?
It gives the bread this wonderful, distinctive internal warmth and depth of flavor that permeates every bite, rather than just being a surface note. Mexican cinnamon, canela, is often Ceylon cinnamon, which is milder and more complex than the cassia cinnamon common in the U.S., so it integrates beautifully. While it's true that high concentrations of cinnamon can technically inhibit yeast activity slightly due to its natural compounds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but the amount used here, especially if it's good quality, finely ground canela, usually isn't enough to cause significant problems. The dough should still remain elastic and achieve a good rise, especially with proper kneading, maybe 8–10 minutes until smooth and slightly tacky, similar to the other enriched doughs. The result is a bread that's warmly spiced throughout.
Okay, cinnamon in the dough. Now, the white glaze. The technique seems similar to Yucatan's glaze in principle, but there's a key difference noted in the ingredients: the choice of acid.
Yes, that's a subtle but really important technical distinction for achieving that specific look. For the Guanajuato white glaze, bakers often use fresh lemon juice instead of orange juice or watermilk to mix with the powdered sugar and vanilla.
Whey lemon juice.
Lemon juice has a sharper acidity than orange juice, and it seems to react with the powdered sugar in a way that helps create a more opaque, brighter, purer white finish. An orange juice-based glaze might have slightly yellowish or creamier tint. The lemon juice helps achieve that really stark, ethereal white canvas. Again, you whisk it vigorously until it's perfectly smooth and dense enough to provide total opaque coverage on the cooled bread. You can adjust the thickness with a tiny bit more lemon juice or powdered sugar.
Interesting swap. Now, the shaping in Guanajuato seems to be a beautiful blend of the traditional and the regional, perhaps more so than other areas.
It often is. While the classic round loaves with the crossed bones and skull are definitely common, Guanajuato is also particularly known for featuring regional animal shapes alongside, or instead of, the human figures sometimes seen elsewhere.
Animal shapes, like what?
Sheep are very traditional, representing innocence maybe. Also rabbits, sometimes horses or donkeys. These animal shapes are often favored, especially if the bread is intended for the ofrenda of a deceased child, Angelito.
How do they make those? Is it complex like the Mexichuacan figures?
Maybe not quite as intricate as the folded arms, but it requires care. For a sheep, for example, you might form an oval body, then carefully pinch and pull the dough to create little legs and maybe a pointy nose or ears. For a rabbit, perhaps a teardrop shape for the body with pinched ears and a little ball for a tail. Because these shapes are often smaller and flatter than the round loaves, they require shorter bake time too, maybe only 18-22 minutes.
And the finishing touch is that colored sugar applied onto the white glaze canvas. How is that done?
Right. Once the thick white glaze has been spread generously over the completely cool bread, again, cooling is critical, you let it set just slightly, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, until it's still tacky to the touch but not completely wet. Then you use pink or sometimes red colored sugar, but only for the decoration, not as an all-over coating.
So it's an accent.
Exactly. On the traditional round loaves, the colored sugar is often applied in a clear cross pattern over the white glaze where the dough bones would be underneath. On the animal shapes, it might be used more sparingly to define simple features, maybe eyes for the sheep, or outlining the ears of the rabbit. The contrast between the pure white glaze and these delicate touches of pink or red creates the final aesthetic.
And what is that final aesthetic aiming for?
It's generally perceived as delicate, pure, almost ethereal, suggesting innocence, peace, and remembrance. The visual presentation often reinforces this feeling. The white glazed breads might be displayed with arrangements of white flowers, like gladiolas or white roses, perhaps placed on clean white linen cloths.
And the traditional pairing reflects this too.
Often, yes. It might be served with atole blanco, which is a simple white, warm, thick drink made from masa harina, corn flour, water, and maybe a little sweetener, or sometimes just warm milk infused with a stick of cinnamon, echoing the spice within the bread itself. It's a much softer, quieter presentation compared to the vibrancy of Yucatan or the richness of Oaxaca.
Hmm.
Okay, so now you've navigated the complexities and beauties of 5 distinct regional Pan de Muerto traditions. You've baked your masterpiece. Let's turn to the really practical side. How do you keep this beautiful symbolic bread at its absolute best for as long as possible?
Right, because enriched breads like this can stale quickly. And the number one cardinal rule, which often feels counterintuitive, especially for bakers used to refrigerating everything to make it last longer, is do not refrigerate pan de muerto.
That is absolutely the most crucial piece of storage advice we can give you. Please don't put it in the fridge. Refrigeration, because of the way starch molecules behave at cool temperatures, a process called retrogradation, actually accelerates the staling process in most breads, especially enriched ones. It will dry the bread out much faster and make it tough and crumbly.
So where should you store it?
Pan de Muerto stores best simply at room temperature. Keep it in an airtight container, a large plastic bin with a good seal, or wrapped very well in plastic wrap, or in a bread bag. Stored properly like this, it should stay reasonably soft and pliable for about 3 to 4 days. Although realistically, it's always at its peak softness and best texture on day 1 and day 2.
Okay, room temp, airtight. Now what about those variations we covered that have those thick glazes, like the Yucatan red glaze or the Guanajuato white glaze? Does storage require an extra step for those?
Yes, definitely. Those thick glazes, especially the opaque white one from Guanajuato, can remain slightly tacky, even when fully set. If you just piled the glazed loaves on top of each other in a container, the glaze from one loaf can stick to the bottom of the loaf above it, ruining the finish you worked so hard to achieve.
So what's the solution?
Simple. You just need to place a sheet of parchment paper or wax paper between the layers if you need to stack them in your storage container. This prevents the glaze from sticking and keeps each loaf looking pristine.
Good practical tip. But even if you follow all the rules, by day 3 or 4, the bread might be getting a little dry. Is it a complete loss at that point?
Oh, far from it. That rich, brioche-like structure, even when it starts to stale, is absolutely perfect for transformation. The best use for day-old or 2 or 3 day old pan de muerto is making pan francés.
Pan francés, that's the Mexican version of French toast, right?
Exactly. The slight dryness actually helps the bread structure hold up even better to soaking in a rich custard, typically made with eggs, milk, cinnamon, maybe vanilla or orange zest, to echo the bread's flavors. The drier bread absorbs the custard beautifully without immediately turning to mush. Then you just pan-fry it in butter until golden brown. It's a delicious way to give the bread a second life and enjoy those flavors a little longer. You could also make bread pudding with it. Hashtag 3.2 traditional serving methods.
Okay, stored, sorted. Let's talk about serving. Pan de Muerto is fundamentally about connection, right? A celebration meant to be shared with family, friends, and, of course, the returning spirits. What are the universal, absolutely essential pairings when you serve it?
Universally, across almost all regions, pan de muerto is served with hot, rich beverages. That's the classic combination. This almost always means Mexican hot chocolate, which is typically less sweet than American hot chocolate and often intensely flavored with cinnamon, sometimes chili,
Or champorado.
or champorado, yes, which is an even thicker, more decadent, almost pudding-like chocolate drink that's thickened with masa harina, the same corn flour used for tortillas and tamales. It's incredibly rich and comforting. Or, for coffee lovers, café de olla.
Café de ra. Explain that one.
That's coffee traditionally brewed in an earthenware clay pot, olla, which is said to impart a specific subtle flavor. It's brewed with water, coarsely ground coffee, a stick of cinnamon, canela, and sweetened with piloncillo, which is a type of raw, unrefined cane sugar that comes in a cone shape and has a deep molasses-like flavor. It's fragrant and warming.
And the bread itself, its structure, seems almost designed for dunking in these drinks, doesn't it?
It really is. Because of that rich, elastic gluten structure we worked so hard to develop during kneading, even the softer versions, like the Oaxacan pan de yema, tend to hold up beautifully to being dunked into those thick, hot liquids. It soaks up the hot chocolate or the champorado wonderfully without immediately falling apart into a soggy mess. Dunking is practically mandatory.
Beyond the essential hot drinks, are there other traditional accompaniments you might see served alongside?
It's often served quite simply, letting the bread and the hot drink be the stars. You might see a platter of fresh seasonal fruit alongside it. Sometimes, especially for breakfast or a snack, people might serve it with a little dollop of cajeta.
Cajeta, that's the goat milk caramel, right?
Exactly. A rich, golden brown, caramelized goat milk spread, similar to dulce de leche, but with that distinctive goat milk tang. It's delicious. Or maybe just some Mexican crema, which is a cultured cream, slightly thicker and tangier than American sour cream, more like creme fraiche. Its slight sourness provides a nice counterpoint to the sweetness of the bread.
Simple but delicious additions. And finally, let's just circle back one last time to its critical ritual function, not just as food for the living, but its role on the ofrenda, reminding us of that cycle of sharing.
Yes. While a family or a bakery might bake many, many loaves indeed, many bakers run out of ingredients because the demand is so high around the holiday tradition, dictates that at least one perfect, beautiful loaf must be placed specifically on the ofrenda. This is the one reserved for the departed spirits, to absorb its essence, its aroma, its spiritual nourishment after their journey.
And the rest are for the living.
Exactly. The remaining loaves are reserved for the living, for the family to eat together, to share with visitors who come to pay respects, maybe to take to the cemetery. It ensures the tradition continues, the connection is maintained, and that cycle of remembrance, offering, and consumption is tangibly complete, bridging the world of the living and the world of the dead through this one special bread. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, this deep dive into Pan de Muerto has really revealed such a profound depth, hasn't it? And just a stunning diversity packed within what seems like a single culinary tradition.
It really is incredible. We've journeyed from the aromatic orange blossom water and the precise kneading required for Mexico City's classical hojaldre,
To the intense egg yolk richness and sesame seed tears of Oaxacan pan de yema.
then the stark, butter-finished, sculptural symbolism of Michoacan's crossed arm figures.
And the vibrant, almost challenging red glazes of the Yucatan demanding your attention.
All the way to the delicate cinnamon-infused, white-glazed purity of Guanajuato's breads. It's a continent of flavors and forms in one category.
And each piece, whether it's a simple round bun or an elaborately sculpted figure or a brightly glazed loaf, it feels like it's a direct link back through centuries of history, doesn't it? A celebration of family tradition, regional pride, and a very tangible expression of that enduring, uniquely Mexican connection between the living and the departed.
It truly is. It might just be the bread that best defines a nation's complex and beautiful attitude toward life, death, and memory.
So we'll leave you, our listeners, with that provocative thought we encountered earlier posed by Jose Luis Curiel Montegoro. By consuming this bread of the dead, Mexicans, and now increasingly people around the world, assimilate the phenomenon of death with both respect and irony.
That blend is key.
It really is.
Yeah.
So maybe reflect. What modern traditions do you observe in your own culture or family that maybe challenge serious concepts like grief, loss, mortality with a touch of humor? Or perhaps with something delicious that you choose to consume as part of the ritual? What part of the past or what aspect of remembrance do you choose to eat? Think about the symbolism baked into your own life and traditions.
A lot to chew on there. Thank you for joining us for this very flavorful and I hope deeply detailed deep dive into Pan de Muerto.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.